and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Gertrude Stein. My Barbour went a little overboard this week. That's Andy Hum.
And Ann Northrup. Aussie, Aussie, Aussie.
Congratulations, Australia. Big victory there as that postal survey vote sponsored by the government that we kept telling you about led to a big victory, and the weddings on same-sex marriage, and the weddings should take place by the year's end.
Well, they have to get it through Parliament first, but we'll go over the details. Meanwhile, back in the US of A, the Pentagon authorized gender confirmation surgery for an active duty service member, and that surgery has been performed in spite of Mr. Trump's objections.
Get out your pen and paper, or maybe you can type on your device, but we are going to tell you about all the terrible Trump judicial nominees and how you need to be contacting your senators to stop this.
I think they understand you. It's a theme we've been pounding for weeks, and it's only getting worse.
It is getting worse.
Roy Moore, of course, we're following, as are you. He's being exposed as a serial predator of teenage girls, and you know about him opposing same-sex marriage. He's got another little anti-lesbian moment in his background that we'll tell you about.
And while that story has sort of dominated the news, the Republican Congress is rushing through its tax giveaway to the wealthy that now includes in the Senate bill a repeal of the ACA individual mandate, the Affordable Care Act, to knock 13 million people off health insurance.
So that they can save enough money to give it to the rich people.
It's just
It's true. We have a couple of stories of horrific anti-gay violence in Indianapolis, Indiana, and Muskegon Heights, Michigan.
And Liz Smith, the out lesbian queen of gossip columnists for decades, really, has died at 94.
Liz Smith proved that it's never too late to come out.
That's true. We had some run-ins with her.
Yes, as did everybody. John DeCecco, the longtime editor of the Journal of Homosexuality, died at 92.
And the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has dropped LGBT people from their strategic plan for the next 4 years.
Oh, boy.
Unless we can get ourselves back in there.
But for once, we're going to start with good news from Australia. Now, we have been following for months this...
Years.
Yes, certainly for years, the attempt to legalize same-sex marriage in Australia. And the latest episode involved a postal survey of the population of Australia.
This was supposed to have been done by the government. That's how things work. The parliament votes. And the majority of the parliament was in favor of same-sex marriage. But the government is led by the Conservatives, called the Liberal Party, by Malcolm Turnbull. And he pledged to the far right in his coalition, no, we're not going to vote on same-sex marriage unless we have a referendum.
Yes.
So there were enough people who said, no, we don't want a referendum on this, that they stopped that. They were able to stop that. But he ordered personally, well, then let's just have a postal survey and then we can go ahead.
A non-binding, taking the temperature of the population. If they want it, then we can take it to Parliament. If they don't want it, who knows what we'll do.
I wonder if the Russians interfered with this. Well, I just read that in the Brexit vote, which was also supposed to be advisory, the Russians interfered.
Well, we were very nervous about this vote. We knew that the polls in the country supported same-sex marriage overwhelmingly, but coming up to the election, there were all sorts of scary moments where they said the Conservatives are running these heinous ads and they're scaring people and no one knows how to go to the post office anymore.
That's true.
And young people won't vote. And
what's a stamp?
And, there's always the hidden conservative vote, and this could go down in flames. Well, as it turned out, first of all, 79.5% of the country did go to the post office to register their opinion
Now,
on
they have a
same-sex
tradition
marriage.
of voting, not only a tradition of voting there, in general elections, you are required to vote. Not in this, but in general elections, you are required to vote or you pay a fine.
Yes, but you were not required to vote
That's
in this,
correct.
and
And
you
it-
had to go to the post office to do it. It wasn't like there was a polling place.
No, you could drop it in the mailbox.
But yes, that's true.
Okay.
But you still had to do that. So
Nobody
just
wants
short,
to go to the post office.
just short of 80% of the population actually voted, and of those, 61.6% voted yes.
Basically, 62 to 38. It was, a tremendous victory there on that. Huge. Very similar to the Irish vote.
So now it goes to, well, and funny you should mention that because, of course, this whole campaign for our side was led by the guy who ran the campaign in Ireland. He deserves a little sainthood this year because he has brought in overwhelming votes for marriage in Ireland and in Australia.
We may need him here if we get another justice on the Supreme Court from Trump. Seriously, folks, we may have to go back to the polls in various states to undo these constitutional amendments on same-sex marriage, against same-sex marriage, because Supreme Court decisions are not forever.
Well, this vote in Australia is not an official vote to legalize either. The Irish vote and a few votes in U.S. states, Maine, Maryland, and Washington, are the only places where they've done legal votes to pass same-sex marriage. But now this goes to the Parliament in Australia, and suddenly Malcolm Turnbull, the Prime Minister, who is of the Liberal centrist to right-wing party, is all in favor of it and gung-ho, and let's get this done by Christmas, and let's get it done as a clean bill without all these religious exemptions that the right wing wants to add to it.
And so that will be the fight there, although it is expected that they're going to do it, and there will be same-sex weddings by Christmas.
Well, by the end of the year, they're saying, but that's only if Parliament rushes this through. It is the middle of November.
Yeah.
They don't have a lot of time to do this. And there is going to be a fight over these religious exemptions, and the right wing will try to slow this down as much as possible.
This was hard work. We didn't want to do it. I mean, it's outrageous that we ever have to do these things, that we have to put civil rights up to a vote. But the campaign that Ann was referring to made 1 million phone calls and knocked on 100,000 doors to make this happen, and got this unprecedented. And so this will be the 25th nation to open marriage to same-sex couples. Now, the leader of the opposition on this was Tony Abbott, the former prime minister, a right-wing Catholic who has a lesbian sister, who opposed him on this, of course.
And who's very in league with the Alliance Defending Freedom and Liberty Council. In
his electorate of a place called Warringah, the vote was 75% yes and 25% no.
But here's what I would like to ponder for a second. There were a lot of LGBT activists who were certainly against this survey taking place in the first place because they didn't want human rights voted on, and who were quite negative about the whole process. And I wonder whether they just didn't have enough faith in the people and the overwhelming polls in favor of marriage.
Wait a minute, that's what the right wing said all the time whenever they had these constitutional amendment votes in New York. Why don't you trust the people? Because we don't,
Well, we did have an overwhelming win, and
we shouldn't,
there were a lot of negative
we shouldn't.
predictions.
In Washington, D.C., they have a law that says you cannot subject to a referendum a human rights issue, and I think that's the way it should be everywhere.
That's true.
All right. Now, and again, this is a reminder to us in America, don't rest on your laurels because we got a nice Supreme Court decision. We need to be doing work on the ground to get rid of these anti-same-sex marriage laws, which could come back into effect under a Trump court. And we're going to talk a lot about the courts on this show today.
But before we get to more doom and gloom, let's put out one more ray of light. The Defense Department, which has been trying its best to slow down the Trump attempt to screw trans members of the military, the Defense Department went ahead and approved gender confirmation surgery for a member of the infantry who had served in Afghanistan. And she has now had that surgery, not in a military hospital because they say they don't have enough expertise there. So she was given a waiver to have it done in a civilian hospital. And
they granted a waiver.
As I just said,
yes.
She was granted a waiver.
Right.
But all of this is because Trump put out his tweet, no more trans service in the military, we're kicking him out, no surgery, no medical help. And then the court decision a week or two ago put all that on hold and said things must proceed as they are.
But the reason I emphasize the word waiver is because it's not required that they do this surgery for the military, and they have to make it on it. They're doing it on a case-by-case basis.
It's a debatable proposition. What constitutes mandatory medical care?
Well, I post this on Facebook, and somebody chimes in, somebody I don't really know, and says, apparently somebody who's connected to me on Facebook, and says, a veteran, not with my tax money. And I said, what medical procedures, other medical procedures would you like to deny to people? Where's the solidarity? Where's the troop cohesion here?
And shall we again talk about how much the military spends on Viagra?
Well. Exactly.
At any rate, she has had the surgery. She is getting support from the Defense Department. They have been terrific about supporting trans service members, and our legal groups are fighting like crazy to make sure that these service members remain in place, respected, and cared for.
Now, all right. Now, the reason I asked you to get your notebooks out, how many Republican senators can you even consider might help us on blocking bad judgeships? None so far, but some of them did come forward on the healthcare stuff, like McCain and Susan Collins and Murkowski, and maybe we could get Rob Portman on some of this stuff. I don't know, but if you live in these states, McCain in Arizona, Susan Collins of Maine, Murkowski of Alaska, and Portman of Ohio, who has a gay son, we've got to get some efforts going here on a couple of issues. So we're going to talk about the judges, but there's what the Republicans just did on the tax bill. They are repealing the mandate on the Affordable Care Act, and if they do this, it will knock 13 million people off of their health insurance. It's an outrage. We have to focus and stop them. They're rushing this through. But the House is going to vote this week, and the Senate is supposed to vote right after Thanksgiving. And they're trying to rush it through while you're, talking about Russia and Roy Moore. So we've got to focus on this the way we did on health care and try to pry in your states some of these senators off these bills.
It certainly couldn't hurt to remind them that you're opposed to this. I think these tax bills are very controversial.
We need angry demonstrations about this. The stuff you're going to lose onto this tax bill in terms of benefits, in terms of public services, is just astronomical.
Money you're paying. The tax bill is going to go up for a lot of more moderate income people, while it goes down for rich people.
Right. So. So shall we talk about the judges?
Yes.
All right. We get missives from civil rights groups, from Lambda Legal Defense, from all these groups telling us about these people, but they're all sailing through. And I think it's worth it to tell you exactly how bad these people are. We've
gone through quite a list in the last few weeks.
We have, but some of them have not been cleared yet, and these are the people that
some of them have.
Some of them have. Well, they've been cleared through committee, and some of them have been confirmed by the Senate. Yep. They only need 50 votes to do it. So we only need, 3 senators to say this person is too extreme.
But it's interesting that these people are so extreme, and we have documented that over and over, and so has everybody else, and yet they do sail through when, in fact, those 3 Republicans stood up against the health care repeal.
Yes.
And why would these judges be different?
And the sad and depressing thing is that these are not just conservatives, they are anti-LGBT activists who have been involved with anti-LGBT groups. And the depressing thing is, They obviously don't care that these people oppose not just gay rights, gay people, the humanity of gay people. I mean,
in their opinions, they're as bad as Roy Moore. They may not be child molesters, but they are certainly as bad in their decision making and their statements.
I mean, this Jeff Mateer is the one who said that transgender children are part of Satan's plan. He opposes conversion therapy. He compared
pro conversion therapy.
He's pro conversion. He's against the bills to ban conversion therapy, and he's compared marriage equality to bestiality. And then we have a picture of this guy. This is the one. If we can't stop this guy, we can't stop any of them. This is Brett Talley, rated unanimously not qualified by the American Bar Association. After the Sandy Hook, shootings of all those kids, he said gun control doesn't work. Man up. Get a gun and stop being pansies about it. I mean, if that doesn't offend the conscience of a nation, I don't know what does. But of course, what might get him in trouble is not that, unfortunately, but his relationship to his wife.
She works for Don McGahn, the chief counsel in the White House, who has been nominating all these judges, these right-wingers, who sits down with the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation and comes up with the names of all these right-wing judges. So she works for him. And she has been interviewed by Bob Mueller, the counsel who's looking into the Russia stuff, because she has been taking notes on all the conversations in the White House. So the question is, did the White House nominate her husband for a judgeship, even though he is completely unqualified, because they want to shut her up? And
her husband has never tried a case in his life.
No.
I mean, this is insane. I mean, there's another one of them, Stephen Schwartz, who's 34 years old. I mean, you're supposed to have 12 years of bench experience before you go to the federal courts. They're not waiting for that anymore. And these are people who have worked against Gavin Grimm in the Gloucester County, in the Virginia case, transgender case. Every single one of them, they're involved with the, there's the guy from Stephen Grass, G-R-A-S-Z, from the Nebraska Family Alliance. I mean, that's part of the focus on the family.
Yes.
These are zealots.
These are people being picked by Tony Perkins, by the Heritage Foundation, by the what did I just mention? But
focus on the family.
But also the right-wing legal groups.
Alliance Defending Freedom.
Yes, they're all coming up with these names, and that's where all this is coming from. And they're taking over the federal court system.
There used to be a veneer. They certainly could.
Because the Republicans blocked Obama from filling any of these posts because they had the majority in the Senate, and they still have the majority in the Senate, so now they can go ahead and fill all those empty positions with these right-wing nuts.
And the only way to stop this is through electing a Democratic majority that will block them in 2018, or maybe sooner if a couple of people lose.
Well, if Doug Jones can beat Roy Moore.
Well, so
that would help.
So again, what do you need to do? If you live in a state where you have a Republican senator and who is somewhat swayable on some issues. I mean, John McCain has voted for some gay rights issues recently. Emphasize this issue and say, stop this. Make them send up better nominees. They're going to be conservative, but they shouldn't be crazies.
So we are, of course, following the Roy Moore story, because how could you not? And I'm happy that there is frequent mention of the fact that he's heinous, not just because of what he has done in attacking young girls and following them around and being a general creep, but that he tried to interfere with the legalization of same-sex marriage. But there's another case that's turned up. In the 90s, he was a presiding judge in a case where a lesbian, a woman who had come out, was divorcing her husband, and they were fighting over visitation with the kids. And because she had come out as a lesbian, Roy Moore interfered with her visitation with her own kids.
Well, and of course, Doug Jones, the Democratic nominee, one of the ads he has been running is about the decision that the dissent that he made in a case where a guy was accused of sodomy with a 4-year-old or something like that. I mean, you know,
I haven't heard this
yeah,
one.
I mean, yeah. Well, that's one of the things that he's most known for.
Nonetheless, there's certainly a substantial chance that he will be elected senator from Alabama.
You know, I mean, it's the stuff. The woman who testified this week publicly with Gloria Allred. This Nelson, what is her name again?
Nelson.
Beverly Young Nelson with Gloria Allred. You know, was so compelling. I mean, before we had a Washington Post story.
Yeah, but you look at, you know, they interview people in Alabama and they're still saying, I don't believe her. I know Roy Moore. I would never vote for a Democrat. You know, they have a whole list of reasons.
Fundamentalist Christians in this country who have stuck with Trump through thick and thin are getting what they want. They're getting courts that are going to end women's reproductive rights, end LGBT rights. I mean, I'm talking about ending. Yeah. You can have a local gay rights law, as we do in many parts of the state laws and things in this country. But if they start making decisions that say you can do anything you want based on your religious conscience, those laws go out the window. That, of course, is the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, which is going before the Supreme Court in December. So we're in trouble.
Big trouble.
Big trouble.
All right, then back to some good news.
All right.
Follow up on last week's elections. We gave you the good news, election news of things like Danica Rome being elected in Virginia to the House of Delegates.
I have a correction from last week.
Yes.
I said that West Hollywood might have been the first place to have an all-gay legislature, city council. West Hollywood was the first to have a majority of LGBT people, and of course Palm Springs is the first city to have an all-gay city council. LGBT, I'm sorry.
The Somersworth, New Hampshire School Board now has a trans woman on their board, Jerry Cannon. I can't read my own handwriting. I think we have a picture of Jerry for the New Hampshire, Somersworth, New Hampshire School Board.
I don't know that we do.
No, I'm wrong. No picture of Jerry, but we do have a picture of, is it Steph?
Steph Kuntz. From Georgia.
Dorville, Georgia City Council, trans woman elected to the City Council in Dorville, Georgia.
Yep.
And we weren't sure about the outcome of this next race last week, but now we know that a trans man, Philippe Cunningham, is joining the Minneapolis City Council along with the trans woman who we did know about last week who was elected. So 2 new trans members of the Minneapolis City Council.
Right. And we should point out that in St. Petersburg, Florida, it's not an LGBT candidate, but the mayor there, Rick Kreisman, was narrowly reelected. He's the incumbent against a very anti-LGBT challenger, the former mayor, Rick Baker. So we held on to that seat.
And the Stamford, Connecticut Board of Representatives has a new trans member, a trans woman, Raven Matame, I think. Again, I can't read my own handwriting. Now, a lot of these, so there were at least 7 trans candidates elected around the United States to these local and statewide offices. And a lot of this has to do with the creation this last year of the Trans United Fund Political Action Committee, where there was some good grassroots organizing and some raising of money to put into these races. And that made a big difference in getting people elected.
Things don't just happen, folks. There needs to be some money behind it.
Yeah. Now we have an upcoming race in Kentucky.
Maybe. You know about Kim Davis. We'll put her picture up with this. She denied a marriage license to couples there in Kentucky, citing her religion. She became a cause célèbre. She even got to meet with the Pope. So the guy.
Is that her mugshot on the right there?
Yes, it is her mugshot. I guess that's a little editorial, isn't it? But this is the couple that she denied the marriage license to.
Yeah.
Yes, one of the couples. And the guy on the right in that picture is a guy named David Ermold, who's an English professor. And he's ready to jump in the race for county clerk to oppose her. He says somebody needs to do it. And he said if she was reelected without a fight, I'd probably regret it for the rest of my life.
Well, good for you, David. And that's why a lot of these trans people got elected, because they decided and a lot of these women in these races last week across the country, because they just all said, I'm not going to take it anymore. I have to take responsibility to step up and run.
And it's not just LGBT people. It's all kinds of people who have been on the sidelines.
Yep.
You know, we over the many years we have done this show.
Is that a reference to Kirsten Gillibrand's PAC Off the Sidelines?
Oh, yeah? No, I didn't know that she had
supports
that was the name
women
of it.
running for office, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes. But we've observed over the years, you know, places like Colorado Springs, where they elect these crazy, you know, religious right school boards, and they start banning books and things like that. And then, you know,
I thought that was Texas.
Well, everywhere, but it's everywhere.
Yeah.
But people, you know, it happens at the local level, and people who say, I don't want to serve on the school board. I'm having a decent life. But that's what gets people out and says, okay, now I have to do it. I have to run, and that's happening all over the country on so many issues.
Yes, and it's what the Republicans have done so successfully in the last few decades, is start at the grassroots level and work themselves up into the power structure. That's why we have so many Republicans in power in state houses. So many legislatures are Republican now, because they did go out there and run for all those offices.
And of course, there's a big, we might discuss this somewhat on our show next week when we're going to do a roundtable with activists. We're going to have J.W. Walker from Rise and Resist, and we're going to have Randy Weingarten from the United Federation of Teachers, now lesbian.
Is it United or American?
No. Oh, UFT, AFT, American Federation of Teachers. Yeah, that's the national union. And we're going to have on Jillian Weiss, who's the executive director of the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund. We're going to discuss issues like this, about how the resistance is going and where we're going to go. But this article came out this week by from the Courage Campaign saying, look, you know, there's a lot of talk about you got to win back, you know, these disaffected Rust Belt white voters, you know, et cetera. And he says that, look, the focus has to be on people of color, the LGBT community, younger voters, and white progressives. They're much more likely to vote for progressive candidates. And sure, it'd be great if we could win some converts. But as you were talking about in Alabama, people put up blinders.
They do, and there are far more people who agree with us, who are not energized, who are not voting, who are available to be energized and to vote, than there are people who are right-wingers who are likely to switch sides. So our energy has to go into giving people hope, as Harvey Milk said, and getting them out. And that's exactly what happened last Tuesday in the elections.
Well, I see that the Human Rights Campaign says that they've identified more than 52 million likely equality voters in 6 swing states who are strong supporters of our equality. Well, that would be nice.
Yes,
but that's what you have
they're
to do.
there. I mean, look at 80% of Australia shows up to vote in a vote where they don't have to vote. And what do we get? Like
50 if you're lucky.
On a good day, on a really good day.
Well, we just voted in New York, right? We had municipal elections. We reelected the mayor and everything. But technically,
city council.
If you looked at the ballot, nothing was really being seriously contested in most districts. So people make a decision at that point. Well, this has already been decided, and I'm not participating.
But even in more important,
we vote all the time.
In more important elections, we get very low turnout compared to a lot of the rest of the world.
People get turned off to their choices. You know,
whatever. My point is, there is a lot of fertile ground out there to be plowed, a lot of people available to be energized. Yes. We have not hit the ceiling for people voting.
Well, we'll talk more about this next week. But that's what I said right after the election. You know, trying to win back Trump voters is very difficult.
Yeah.
But energizing.
Although he's doing a good job of turning some of them. All right.
All right, we
other
skipped over.
news?
We skipped over when we were talking about Roy Moore some of the other cases of harassment and things. It was good to see Ellen Page speaking about her experience with
the young actress,
sexual harassment and homophobia from Bruce Ratner, the director, on a movie set.
Brett Ratner.
I'm sorry, Brett Ratner. Brett Ratner. She says I have
a role here.
To correct me.
Yes.
Thank you, Anne.
She was harassed and outed by Brett Ratner on the set of X-Man when she was 18.
Before she was ready, she said, I was a young adult who would not come out to myself. I knew I was gay, but I did not know, so to speak. I felt violated when this happened. He outed me with no regard for my well-being, an act we all recognize as homophobic.
He said in front of others to an older woman standing there with Ellen Page, you should F her to make her realize she's gay.
This was Brett Ratner. And then there's the George Takei case. Now, he was somebody we've much admired over the years, and an out gay activist. Somebody has brought up something that they say happened to them at his hands, groped and plied with alcohol.
A young man, 23 years old, said he was
40 years ago.
Yeah, that he thinks maybe he was drugged or he was just drunk and passed out, and he woke up and George Takei was taking off his pants and groping him. Now, George Takei...
And he says he told his friends at the time.
Yeah, and George Takei says he has no memory of this.
Doesn't know who it is.
But George Takei also said, there's no question I was a little sexually aggressive in those days.
Right.
So, who knows?
So people wonder if I have a double standard, since I certainly let Kevin Spacey have it, and Harvey Weinstein, and Bill Cosby, and all these others. But in those cases, we did know about multiple stories over decades, and we don't know this about George Takei at this point. So we'll see what happens with that case.
Yes, we will. All right, shall we move on to other things?
Yes.
Well, another thing from the federal government, the Health and Human Services Department is holding a homeless youth conference this weekend, I think, or last weekend. And they censored any mention of LGBT kids, even though 40% of homeless youth are LGBT.
Well, in the Trump administration, it sort of depends on who's still around from the old administration.
Yes, we've seen the State Department do some good stuff. The Defense Department have been champs. But yeah, it depends on who's in charge at what department.
Now, the Human Rights Campaign came out with its annual Corporate Equality Index and said that they gave 609 companies perfect scores. Now, all of this is based on what the company says are its policies. It's published policies. It's all well and good to have nice policies. But they don't really delve very deeply into, are these good places to work for LGBT people? And the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund went after the Human Rights Campaign on this and said, Walmart, perfect score when we're suing them. We've had 2 suits against them in terms, so they put an asterisk up there for Walmart.
They suspended them.
Yes.
They suspended their rating in the Corporate Equality Index because they're not enforcing their rules on non-discrimination on the basis of gender identity.
Right.
The FBI came out with its 2016 report on hate crimes, over 6,000 hate crimes. Now, frankly, there are about 6,000 hate crimes a minute in this country. But so this is just a tip of the iceberg kind of indication. 1,000 of the reported hate crimes, 1 out of 6, were lesbian, gay, and bisexual, meaning against lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, and another 124 were anti-trans hate crimes. Now, again, a tiny microscopic part of the whole picture, but the FBI is giving us some indication.
Well, and speaking of hate crimes, let's start.
Well, the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Projects released its 2016 report on intimate partner violence in the LGBTQ community and among those with HIV. And you can take a look at that report by going to avp, antiviolenceproject.org, to get the 2016 intimate partner violence report.
Right. All right, and speaking of violence, we have a video of this. This happened in Muskegon Heights, Michigan, where police officers arrested an 18-year-old there, Trevor Godbolt, for, well, let's look at the report and then we'll talk about it.
Evening, I'm Juliette Dragus.
I'm Nick Lefebvre. Police say they have captured the man accused of beating a Muskegon Heights teenager because he's gay. 18-year-old Trayvon Godbolt is now locked in Muskegon County Jail.
Investigators say Godbolt and possibly 3 accomplices beat, insulted, robbed, and stripped the 17-year-old victim during a confrontation this weekend, and then posted video of the crime on Facebook.
WZZM 13's Phil Dawson's here now to explain what happened.
Nick, we don't know exactly how the 17-year-old was lured to a dark place near Edgewood School on Saturday night, but when he got there, police say he was attacked and beaten by 18-year-old Trayvon Godbolt. They think another man and 2 women were also involved, and one of them recorded everything on a cell phone.
Please stop.
As punch after punch landed, the 17-year-old begged the man, now identified as Trayvon Godbolt, to stop.
Like to do fake gay shit on Facebook. Catfish people.
But the attack went on for several minutes.
This type of behavior should not and will not be tolerated in this community. We want this guy bad. We want him off the streets.
No!
Police say the 17-year-old was beaten because he is gay.
This young man was targeted based on his sexual orientation.
He was punched, humiliated, insulted, and wronged.
Give me this. I'm taking this.
Along with Trayvon Godbolt, police believe another man and 2 women participated in the attack. Before he was released, the teenager was forced to strip.
Take the shirt off. Take everything off before you leave. Take your drawers off. Take them off. I'm taking them off. Hurry up. Take them off. Take them off. It's off. Just get out of here.
Police responding to a 911 call say they found the naked man, bruised and bleeding, staggering to a relative's house. The Muskegon Heights police chief has sent the video to a contact at the FBI.
He said, Chief, he said, send it to me. I would take it to the U.S. District Attorney and see if we can get a federal indictment for a hate crime.
Investigators responding to a silent observer tip arrested Trayvon Godbolt, also known as Trayvon Taylor, this evening at a house on Blue Lake Road. The prosecutor says he faces unlawful imprisonment and unarmed robbery charges. There is no statute in the state of Michigan that covers intimidation or hate crimes motivated by sexual orientation. Nick?
That's a sad case that they have to go to the feds to get to Jeff Sessions. Well, it's okay to get that off there. Thank you. To go to the feds in order to bring charges on hate crimes.
Well, and the activists have been asking the Civil Rights Commission in Michigan to acknowledge that sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination is covered in Michigan, and the commission has once again rejected that analysis.
Right. And then there's the horrible story from Indianapolis where a teenager, he's an adopted kid, and he's got 2 dads, and he burned the house down and it killed one of his fathers because the kid, who was 16, wanted to be in prison with his biological father. That's why he did it. He had other siblings in the house. They escaped. The other father escaped, but one of the fathers is dead.
Doesn't sound like a sane analysis. Also in Indiana, a trans woman who is in prison is suing for access to hormone therapy. She's been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, but Indiana is saying, well, she wasn't on this before she went to prison, and we have a policy against starting it. And as someone said, if an inmate developed cancer while they were in prison, would you withhold treatment?
It's a pre-existing condition. In Oklahoma City, somebody drove by at night and shot up Freedom, Oklahoma, their office. We have a picture of the storefront there. A lot of severe damage to the place. No one was there or injured, but it's chilling.
Yeah. And in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, they have arrested 5 men for masturbating in a park bathroom.
And they published their names in the paper. Now, you know, this sounds like a sting to me. We don't know
Of
all the
course.
details, but I think these things are mostly outrageous. And in Chicago, bail was denied to two men in a string of armed robberies where they used Grindr to find their victims. They've been arraigned, and they would lure men and then rob them, and they were using a gay app to do it. So be careful.
But in New York City, they're going to make the subway announcements non-binary. There will be no gender references in the
Ladies and gentlemen, you'll no longer be greeted with that.
So I think the subway announcements will be, hey!
They're going to refer to passengers and riders and everyone.
Customers, whatever. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good.
All right, well, let's mourn the death and celebrate the life of Liz Smith, the notorious, famous, legendary gossip columnist, although her gossip was pretty gentle.
Liz Smith was probably, I guess, the highest paid columnist in America at one point. She was making $1 million a year at one point at a newspaper. And of course, she was syndicated. But she, you know, and of course, we had little tussles with her over the years because we knew her to be a lesbian and she didn't want to talk about it. Yeah. She once was given an award by the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and she used that occasion to speak to us and say, now let me tell you people what you need to be doing. And a bunch of lesbians came up to her. I was covering it for this show, and a bunch of lesbians came up and they were furious. They were going to do something. So I went up to Liz and said, a lot of people are very upset here. Because I wish we had the tape. Because, they say, you're a lesbian, and why are you saying you people? And she said, I've been outed by bigger people than you, Buster. That's what she said.
Well, then let's remember her relationships. We have a picture of her with her longtime companion, Iris Love, who was also famous for showing dachshunds, and there's one of them nibbling Liz. They were together for many, many, many years. Iris was an archaeologist. They were a famous couple about town. And then her last long relationship was with the newscaster Cynthia McFadden. There's Liz on the left and Cynthia on the right. Cynthia, I believe, is not out yet.
Oh, yeah? Well, now she is.
Now she is. Liz finally came out officially in an autobiography she wrote in the year 2000 called Natural Blonde.
They come out when they write their books, and the publisher says you need to give them something they don't know.
You know, that's her coming out at 77. That's, she took a while.
She died at 94. That was 77's a long time ago.
She was out for 17 years. I think she enjoyed it.
I interviewed her a couple of years ago as a legend, and she was lovely.
And she was part of a very, high-powered lesbian crowd. I know a lot of people who knew her and hung out with her, and they were all about town, and they were all known. They just didn't talk about it.
She did a blind item in her column in when Gerald Ford was president, so that was the mid-'70s, and it said, some child of a powerful person is going to come out, and it is going to shake this republic to its foundations. That's what she wrote, and the community was totally buzzing. They thought it was one of Ford's sons.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen, but it was the sun. There was the column. Everybody was talking about it.
But it went nowhere. And she was most famous professionally for being involved with the Donald Trump and Ivana Trump divorce. She was on Ivana's side. She got all the information from Ivana. Cindy Adams was on Donald's side, and it was the war of the gossip columnists on the front pages of the tabloids for weeks.
They created a monster.
They did.
All right,
and we also mourn the death of John Paul DiCecco, if I got that pronunciation correct, at 92.
He was a professor emeritus at San Francisco State, most famous, I guess, for being the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Homosexuality from 1975 until 2009. And so he was a gay academic. He did a lot of terrific work.
A real pioneer in researching the community.
And when he moved to the Carlisle Hotel, which is his senior residence, he formed a gay-straight alliance there.
At the Carlisle Hotel on Madison Avenue?
No, this is out
In San Francisco.
Out in California.
Okay.
But he was.
I was going to say.
He was upset with the group because
And you got Bobby Short and who else?
He died at 92. But he was upset with the group because it was a gay-straight alliance, and most of the people who came were straight. Now, he said a lot of
That
the gay
happens in high schools, too.
a lot of the gay people
Yeah.
didn't want to be out in the environment.
Well, and you have closeted kids in gay straight alliances, too, who just go there and are still straight until they come out.
And I see our friend Mitchell Gold is going to merge his group Faith in America with the Tyler Clementi Foundation. He's joined their board, and they're doing that.
Yeah.
And, I do want to make a note about if you're experiencing isolation, especially at the holidays, and you are older, SAGE.
And it isn't voluntary.
No. SAGE has an LGBT elder hotline. They have a number you can call if you want to talk things over, if you're feeling lonely, whatever. It's 1-888-234-SAGE. That's 1-888-234-7243. Okay.
Okay. International news.
Yep.
Well, we told you about Australia, yay. Now we have a number of other items. In Germany, a court has ruled that the government must recognize people who assert a third gender or are intersex.
They said that binary gender designations violate the right to privacy.
Well, I believe people have a right to self-define. Who's anyone else to tell them who they are?
Well.
In Scotland, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, who runs the government, issued a formal apology to gay men who have been criminalized over the years.
This is kind of a symbolic acknowledgement. I mean, they don't wipe out your criminal record for having been prosecuted for this.
Well, there is going to be
You have to apply for that.
Yes, they're going to offer a pardon bill, but you have to apply individually to have your conviction erased. You can have it erased, but they're not doing a blanket erasure. You have to apply.
There are a bunch of senators calling on the Department of State to investigate the anti-LGBTQ human rights abuses in Azerbaijan. Our State Department is not on the case on these most of these issues.
Well, they did chime in on the Olympic truce, and this week the United Nations approved the Olympic truce with the sexual orientation non-discrimination Principle 6 still included in it. Now, it doesn't cover trans people, although the Olympics has some good participation rules for trans people, but in terms of discrimination, it's just covering sexual orientation.
Okay.
But they fought back Russia and Egypt that tried to get rid of the non-discrimination rule.
Some of our friends in Rusa LGBT and then the Ontario-based NGO Kiev Pride Canada, they held a protest at the Ukrainian consulate in New York, and they got a meeting with the people there, and so they're making some progress around these LGBT issues.
That would be nice. Progress in Mozambique, where the Constitutional Court has mandated that the government recognize the only LGBT organization there, Lambda.
Well, they decriminalized homosexuality last year, but they wouldn't recognize a gay group.
Well, surprise, but congratulations. There's a lovely picture of the members of Lambda, the Mozambique LGBT group, and I love showing pictures of LGBT activists around the world. I am heartened on a weekly basis by all that kind of news. And in fact, in India, in New Delhi, even though homosexuality is still illegal in India, although the Constitutional Court has agreed to rehear the case, hundreds of people showed up to march for Pride in New Delhi, India.
On the other hand, 60,000 fascists marched in Warsaw, and that's very disturbing. At least the government, condemned it. But they were chanting things like, "We want God," which is Donald Trump's quoting from him.
Well, remember, he made a very happy trip there on his way to Germany.
Okay.
Activists in the Cayman Islands registered a discrimination complaint with the European Parliament, and the European Parliament has accepted that complaint, and we'll hear it. I don't know what they can do about it, but they've accepted it. And confusing in Bolivia, There's a ruling in Bolivia that transgender people cannot marry in their current gender in heterosexual marriages. So a trans man cannot marry a woman, but a trans man can marry a man because he's perceived as a woman.
Just let people be who they are. Well, I remember psychiatrists who used to deal with, transgender people sometimes, and they'd say, well, now, you were a man, now you're a woman, you've got to go out with men. And, it's like, these are supposed to be the experts.
Cut it out with the rules.
These are supposed to be the experts on sexuality.
And speaking of rules, Ireland will not issue an Irish passport for a boy who is the son of two mothers. There's an Irish mother and a British mother. They live in Britain. The British mother gave birth to the child, but the Irish mother donated the egg. The son is the biological son of the Irish mother, but Ireland considers him the son of the British mother because she gave birth, so they won't give him an Irish passport.
Man.
Can't we all just get along? All right.
Well,
AIDS news?
Well, yeah, we're not being helped by the Department of Health and Human Services, another example of the Trump administration. They come out with a strategic plan every 4 years, and in the draft that they've done, they've eliminated references to LGBT, which is an outrage, and people are protesting, but we'll see where that goes.
Well, here's an ironic piece of news. Donald Trump, in his rush to isolate us from the world, pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a controversial pact to begin with. And one thing we hated about the Trans-Pacific Partnership was that at the behest of the United States, it did what all these agreements do. It propped up the U.S. pharmaceutical companies and forbade generic competition and lower prices, even to poor countries. Well, the U.S. pulls out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The other countries that put it together in the Asian region are going ahead with the agreement, and they have taken out the support for the pharmaceutical companies. So now it's a good agreement.
I mean, Trump, is isolating the United States in the world.
Yeah.
All this America First crap.
Yeah.
We're all part of the world. Look, and I have problems with trade agreements, and I'm pro-labor and all that stuff.
Well, they're fixing them now that the U.S. is out of them. The rest of the world sort of went, whoa, and then thought, wait a minute, we can go ahead and run our lives without this stupid U.S.
So the United States were the bad guys in the negotiation, including Barack Obama.
In these trade agreements, and look, the first person we attacked on this was Al Gore and Bill Clinton for supporting a trade agreement that propped up the pharmaceutical companies 20 years ago. Right. So the world is improving as we withdraw from it.
Did you read about this judge in California, David Downing, in a case? It was a murder case, but he wouldn't read the motions from one of the convicted killers because he had HIV and he didn't want to contaminate himself. So this is going to help the guy maybe get a new trial or something.
No, I've been watching the Menendez brothers Law and Order series where the judge is just heinous throughout and did everything he could to illegally stop any kind of rational defense. And the news this week also is that a bunch of HIV organizations, activists, people living with HIV, got together and signed a very strong letter demanding that Kenneth Cole resign his position as head of the AMFAR board. This all has to do with the Weinstein scandal.
Weinstein was donating what, a work of art?
Now, here's the deal. Weinstein was producing Finding Neverland for Broadway, but he was doing a tryout at a theater in Cambridge, at the ART theater.
It didn't get a good review on Gay USA.
Well, thus the problem. So his arrangement with the theater was that he would put in money to it, but he'd get that money back when nonprofits donated to the theater. Right. So that wasn't happening. So he said to AMFAR, I'm going to donate auction items items for your auction, and then you are going to take part of the half the proceeds and donate them to this theater, so I can get my money back from the theater because you, as the nonprofit, will be donating to the theater.
So his argument would be, look, I'm giving you part of the profits, and part of the profits will go to this thing.
Yes, and the opposition would say AmFAR has no business becoming entangled in a deal like this to give money to a theater from an auction that people think is benefiting them, not to mention doing this sweetheart deal with Harvey Weinstein for his personal profit.
Right.
And Kenneth Cole, as the head of the AmFAR board, is making this happen, while Kevin Frost, the executive director, objects to this and is saying so out loud.
Well, I'm sad to see. I mean, I
going
see that a group of 60 HIV activists, many of them people with AIDS, have objected to this. I mean, certainly Kenneth Cole's done a lot for the community over the years.
Absolutely. And he, on receipt of this letter, said, no, I'm not stepping down. There was nothing illegal or unethical about this deal. And the only reason they say that is because they hired a law firm that would support his analysis of it.
Maybe we'll have to just appoint a special prosecutor. I don't know.
Well, it's a mess, but it's a loud mess.
It is a mess. Entertainment news.
Yes.
Well, you all know what happened with Kevin Spacey, and now, he completed a film where he's playing J. Paul Getty when Getty's grandson was being kidnapped. Back in the day, it's called All the Money in the World. They are going to reshoot his scenes using Christopher Plummer as J. Paul Getty. That's how far Kevin's star has fallen. It's a Ridley Scott movie.
GLAAD, formerly known as the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against...
Now they're just glad.
Yes.
Against defamation.
Thank you. Has put out its annual report on the incidence of LGBT characters on TV, and they say it's the highest ever. Regular and recurring characters on mainstream network TV and major cable systems, 329. I would have said about 3,000. I can't turn around without seeing gay characters everywhere. But they say it's 6.5% of the total number of characters in this universe. No, but there have been some real breakthroughs. The non-binary character on Billions is terrific. And there are a lot of other really important ones around.
It's being more integrated now. It's becoming less calling attention. It's becoming less issue-oriented.
It's more routine.
All that is good. We're going to become boring, as Frank Bruni says.
Now, a couple of weeks ago, we had as a guest on this show Gail Friedman, who made the documentary film Hot to Trot about same-sex ballroom dancing that won the Audience Award at NewFest, the New York LGBT Film Festival, for Best Documentary. NewFest is going to show it at the Center in a special evening showing on Tuesday, November 28th, right after Thanksgiving. 7 o'clock at the Center. Go to newfest.org for information about that. And she's also in London for a film festival, showing it there on the 19th at the Fringe Festival.
If you're listening, Robert, one of our London viewers, and Sam Smith, speaking of the English, has the #1 record, The Thrill of It All.
I know he did. Now he's been superseded by someone else coming in. But he did.
Fame is fleeting.
Yeah, well, in the record industry it is. And
see you next week for our special Thanksgiving show with our panel of activists.
Yes, that's going to be
Jay
really
Walker,
good.
Jillian Weiss, and Randy Weingarten.
We are looking forward to that.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.